The hero with 1,000 faces. The adventurer with many talents.
We're covering multiclassing in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Greetings, adventurers. My name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon Dudes.
On today's episode, we are discussing multiclassing in D&D 5e.
Character creation in Dungeons & Dragons is truly limited only by your imagination. You've got tons of classes, races, feats, and other build options at your disposal. But sometimes realizing your perfect character concept requires mixing and matching between more than one class. This is where multiclassing comes in to make sure that you've got the perfect character for your next idea.
Keep in mind that you can't go wrong by choosing a single class. If you do decide that you want to go the route of multiclassing, this can open up a lot of great options, but it can also stop you from reaching those high-level abilities. You need to pick carefully, and you need to realize the pros and cons.
At the same time, multiclassing has a couple of additional rules and restrictions that come into play if you choose to use those rules. It's important to be aware of what these are because it changes what level your character gains certain abilities at.
So, let's get rolling. What is multiclassing, Monty?
Well, quite simply, if your Dungeon Master has allowed you to use the multiclassing rules, you have the option of taking a level in any other class whenever you gain a new character level. You start off as a first level of that class, gaining the levels that that class does gain at level 1. And those are added together with your current class to determine your overall character level. So for example, if you're a 3rd level wizard and you decide to take a level of fighter, you have the abilities of a level 3 wizard and the abilities of a level 1 fighter. And those are all added together to determine your total character level.
That seems pretty straightforward, but there are some prerequisites required for deciding to multiclass.
Exactly. When you want to multiclass, you need a 13 in 1 or 2 ability scores related to each class. For example, if you want to multiclass into or out of fighter, you need a strength or dexterity of 13. And if you want to multiclass into wizard, you need an intelligence of 13. When you multiclass, your proficiency bonus is now determined by your total character level. So normally every class, you can look on the class table to see what your proficiency bonus is.
But if we have that level 5 character, it's level 5 total, but it might be 3 wizard, 2 fighter.
Exactly, in which case your proficiency bonus would be +3. You wouldn't be adding the proficiency bonus from both classes together to get a +4 proficiency bonus. Right? You keep that separate.
Yeah.
The other thing is that your hit points are kept separately as well. So if you're a level 3 wizard, you have 3d6 hit points, 3d6 worth of hit dice from your wizard levels, and 2d10s from your 2 levels of fighter, which are added together. So each level you get the hit points from the level that you actually gained.
So what about proficiencies when you're multiclassing?
So the interesting thing is that when you multiclass into a new class, you don't automatically gain all the proficiencies of that class at first level. You gain a smaller number. So for instance, if you suddenly decide to gain a level of rogue, you don't all of a sudden gain dexterity and intelligence saving throw proficiency and 4 more skills. You get a few extra skills, but you generally don't get the saving throw proficiencies. And you may or may not get extra skill proficiencies either.
So the class that you're picking first when you are starting the campaign, that's going to kind of define a lot of the core attributes, whereas multiclassing, you don't gain all of the core attributes of that as well. You're just kind of adding that on to your already existing class.
Most notably as well, if you multiclass into a class like a paladin or a fighter, you get some armor proficiencies, but you usually don't get the heavy armor proficiency given to you. You might get extra weapon proficiencies as well. But again, when you're choosing your second class to add on or your 3rd class, make sure you very carefully consult what proficiencies you're actually going to pick up. Because that's told to you by the table in the player's handbook, not consulted from the actual class rules itself. It goes without saying, but you also don't get the extra free equipment either.
So there's a lot of class features that work differently when we're multiclassing than they would normally.
Yeah, there's three really big ones that work differently when you're multiclassing, and those are the extra attack ability, the unarmored defense ability, and things like spellcasting and channel divinity. But there's a couple specific exceptions which we're going to go over as well in turn.
So the extra attack ability, if you choose to multiclass two different classes that gain the extra attack, this does not mean that you get two extra attacks. You still only get the one extra attack. You don't get to double that up.
Yeah, so for instance, if you gain 5 levels of fighter and 5 levels of ranger, both the fighter and the ranger get the extra attack class feature at level 5. So you might think that because you got that class feature twice, that means that you're now able to take 3 attacks total instead of 2. But the extra attack class feature doesn't actually stack. In order to get that third attack, you need to actually have 11 levels of fighter because extra attack is not cumulative. You can only gain that ability once. This applies as a general rule of thumb across all the classes. If 2 class abilities have the same name, you don't get to double those up. There's some small exceptions to that, but for example, you can't gain a fighting style twice. You can gain 2 different ones, but you can't get the same fighting style twice.
In regards to unarmored defense, similar rules apply. You don't stack different types of ways to accumulate AC. You only choose one calculation for your AC and only one, and that is how you calculate it. There's no exceptions to that.
The interesting thing about this, though, is that with the unarmored defense abilities, you still have them all at the same time. It's just that you can only use one of them at any time. So there could be a weird circumstance come up with this. Like, for example, if you were a barbarian monk, and you're not wearing any armor, and you have the ability to add either your dexterity plus your constitution to calculate your AC, or your dexterity plus your wisdom to calculate your AC. And then somehow you ran into a really rare creature that reduced your wisdom score, then you could then choose to use your barbarian unarmored defense instead.
Can you just switch it on the spot? Just be like, no, I'm going to use this.
Yeah, conceivably. Yeah, because there's no rule that states that you have to actively change your AC calculation. Of course, you have to spend time to put on armor. But if you had more than one AC calculation, you could kind of flip it around on the fly. There's no rules for that. And the next one is kind of a niche one, but if you decide to multiclass Paladin and Cleric, you don't gain additional uses of Channel Divinity, but you still gain all the options of Channel Divinity.
So more options, but still only the amount of uses you had before.
And that's going to be a recurring theme with multiclassing in general, and it's going to really come up with spellcasting. The other big thing to be aware of when you're multiclassing is that ability score increases and the ability to gain a feat is tied to your class levels and not your overall character level. So if you go, if you spend your first 8 levels of your character going Class A, Class B, Class A, Class B, then you don't get a feat or ability score increase until level 7, and then you get one at level 7, level 8. So delaying that and splitting up your ability scores is a really big problem for multiclassing.
Yeah, because that's one of the biggest things that every class in the game gets is that ability to either up an ability score or choose a feat, which really drives the build of your character. So yeah, if you kind of lose that, then you're taking away a lot from the character.
Mm-hmm. And you delay access to your higher level spells and other abilities, and those are just always going to be good. So the biggest change for multiclassing in D&D 5th edition is spellcasting.
Yeah, and spellcasting can be one of the most confusing parts of multiclassing because it's a little bit all over the place, and you do need to kind of know how many classes or how many levels of each spellcasting class you're actually taking.
Yeah, this is because if you have more than one spellcasting class, you add those classes together and consult the multiclassing spellcasting table to determine how many spell slots you have. And this has some really interesting and strange implications. Because if you, when you multiclass, add together all your levels of Bard, Cleric, Druid, Wizard, Sorcerer on a 1-to-1 basis, and half your levels as Ranger or Paladin, and 1/3 if you're an Arcane Trickster or Eldritch Knight. So you can end up with a really weird breakdown here, and then you look at the table, and that determines your spell slots, right? So the cool thing about this is that let's say you're multiclassing between Bard and Sorcerer evenly. This means that if you're a level 4 Bard and a level 4 Sorcerer, you're a level 8 character. You actually have the same number of spell slots that a normal level 8 character would have as if you'd single classed.
But if you choose 4 of a sorcerer and 4 of a ranger,
then you'd have the same spell slots of a level 6 spellcaster overall, right? So this means that you can have higher level spell slots than you normally would if you're a paladin or a ranger, and fewer than if you were a single class spellcaster, right? But the interesting thing about this is that the maximum spell you can cast and the spells that you know and have prepared are still locked in your regular class level. So if we go back to our example of our level 4 Bard, level 4 Sorcerer, both the classes are still using their charisma to cast the spells, but you have the spells known of a level 4 Bard and the spells known of a level 4 Sorcerer. And a level 4 Sorcerer and a level 4 Bard can't learn spells higher than 2nd level. So you have a 4th level spell slot, but you don't know any 4th level spells. What this means is that you can cast a 2nd or 1st level spell using your 4th level spell slot to upcast it, but you don't actually get the ability to cast like things like Dimension Door or Wall of Fire or Greater Invisibility.
so even though the spellcasting might be a little bit weaker if you're multiclassing multiple spellcasting classes, the cantrips, on the other hand, you actually get to combine those two. So if we are using our example of the level 4 Bard and the level 4 Sorcerer, that's 3 cantrips from the Bard and 5 cantrips
from the Sorcerer.
So that's 8 cantrips.
Yeah, you get a lot of cantrips. It's pretty versatile.
Yeah. So
And cantrips progression is tied to your overall character level, not your class level. So this is actually kind of cool. If you pretend that you were a 12th level character and you decide to take 1 level of Warlock, you have that Eldritch Blast that shoots 3 rays right away.
It's pretty awesome.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, so you can get a lot more out of your cantrips, even if you're getting a little bit less out of your spells.
Yeah, now the Warlock is the interesting exception to this. The Warlocks don't follow the spellcasting multiclassing rules at all whatsoever. They just get what they get. So if you're a level 3 Warlock and a level 5 Paladin, you get 2 Warlock spell slots, but the level of those spell slots is not affected by your Paladin level at all. Yep, and your Paladin spell slots aren't affected by your Warlock levels at all.
So those just become separate.
They're completely
spell
separate.
slots.
And if you were multiclassing from a spellcaster and a non-spellcaster, the spell slots don't change. So if you were like a level 5 fighter and a level 5 wizard, you'd have the spellcasting of a level 5 wizard, but you wouldn't have anything else. And that's actually that's where we get into the interesting thing of the combinations, right? Because some people argue what's the better Eldritch Knight? Is a level 10 fighter who's an Eldritch Knight a better Eldritch Knight than a level 5 fighter, level 5 wizard, right? So you see how with multiclassing you can realize one concept in 2 different ways.
Yeah, because that's the spellcasting fighter is built into that class of the fighter. But if you want more spellcasting and a little bit less power in the fighting, then you can take the 5 and 5.
Yeah, and there's a lot of really, really powerful combinations that can come of multiclassing, right? You get things like, I think the biggest thing that a lot of people notice is there's 4 classes in the game that all get their spellcasting and class features from charisma. Mm-hmm. So a lot of multiclassing between Bard, Paladin, Warlock, and Sorcerer is really, really popular, especially now with the Hexblade, because you can make your charisma your attack stat.
Yeah.
So a lot of those combinations are really, really strong. At the same time, there's a lot of combinations that are pretty weak.
And that's the one thing to be careful of with multiclassing is I remember when I first asked you about multiclassing, your words to me were, if you choose a class and just play it straight up, you're not going to have a problem.
Yeah.
If you choose to multiclass, there are great choices and there are terrible choices. So it's the only way in D&D that you can actually mess up a character is by multiclassing a bad choice.
Yeah, and the other thing too is that for a lot of players, figuring out like the why of the multiclassing is a really important narrative decision, right? Like, how did your character suddenly learn how to cast spells? Like, if you're a level 10 fighter and all of a sudden you pick up a spell book and start casting spells, you're like, okay, well, where did that come from narratively, right? And so some DMs like to say, like, you can't multiclass unless you have the downtime to learn a new skill set. The rules don't force you to be that draconian if you don't want to be. So straight up, there's no restrictions in the rules if you allow multiclassing. But I find that thinking about like what is your character concept, how do the skills work together, and I think that if I was running a campaign and a bunch of my players were like, I really want a multiclass, I would probably let the party start at like level 3 so they could at least get some of the multiclassing done, so we didn't have to like burden the middle of the campaign with figuring out, well, how did your character suddenly develop sorceress spellcasting? We can figure that out in the backstory instead.
What are your top 3 combinations for multiclassing?
Top 3. Okay. So there's 2 types of multiclassing, right?
Okay.
I would say. There's the really serious multiclass, where you're going like 50-50 between 2 classes. And my favorite 50-50, I think, is the Ranger Rogue.
Ranger Rogue. I can see that being awesome.
Right? Like, I think a level 5 Rogue, level 5 Ranger, pretty good. Pretty good, right? Both those are classes that have a lot of good abilities under level 10 and in the first couple levels, and they complement each other really well. I think my next favorite one, straight up, I think the Warlock Sorcerer combo is just ridiculous.
I've heard a lot about that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people are talking about that.
Yeah. You take 2 or 3 levels of Warlock and the rest Sorcerer, and you get a really awesome Eldritch Blast that you can now quicken with that, and people love it. It's a great damage dealer. My next one probably would be the inverse of that, and I think that this is the one that gives people a lot of like role-playing conniptions, is the Paladin Warlock.
Yeah.
But I love it. I call that the Witch Knight.
That's
right?
cool. Yeah.
Like, I love this idea of like playing like a dark elf or an elf warlock paladin, because to me, like, especially if you're like a vengeance paladin or like a vengeance paladin with a hexblade, or an Oath of the Ancients paladin with a Fey Pact warlock, those to me make a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Right? Especially if you're an elf and it like kind of embodies the way elven culture is set up. I think that that's actually a really flavorful combination. The other one that's just kind of cool is you gain a lot of mileage from adding 2 levels of fighter to anything.
That's fair. If you want to add in a bit more fighting.
Get action surge.
Yeah.
And 1 level of cleric is really sneaky, because clerics are a class that the domain gives you your heavy armor proficiency. So it's a way of sneaking heavy armor proficiency with 1 level of multiclassing onto anybody.
Do you have one that you would label as the absolute worst?
I think the absolute worst multiclass would be anything that is 2 spellcasting classes of wildly different ability scores taken too far. I think that like, if you're like, I want to be a straight up a 50-50 mix between wizard and cleric, is probably, I think you're missing out.
Yeah.
I think the biggest problem with it too is that that's an example of a multiclass that takes a long time to come online. And I think with multiclassing, a big problem is that you can be like, oh, I get all these abilities and it's going to be really cool, but I'm going to have to be a level 15 character for that. And in my experience, campaigns start to hit their endpoint somewhere between level 12 and level 18, and it's very rare for a campaign to go all the way to level 18. So if you as a player are planning out this character build that doesn't really happen until level 18, that might be something that you can only play in a one-shot, but it's really not going to work in a long-term campaign.
So this has been our guide to multiclassing in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. We hope that this inspires you to create some truly epic combinations.
And we'd love to hear about them in the comments below. Please share your stories of your cool multiclass combinations that help you realize the character of your dreams.
And if you're looking for tips to create a truly awesome character, we have a video on that right over here.
And if you're searching for ideas to inform your multi-class combos, check out our series of class guides right over here.
Please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time
In the dungeon.